When Officer Harrison Cooper got a call one night about some strange noises coming from a derelict flatlet, he never anticipated what he was going to find. What resulted in him adopting 3 little black girls was a moment that changed his life forever. The way they repaid him just 27 years later will leave you in tears. Officer Harrison Cooper was on a quiet round one freezing evening in Chicago when he got a call from the precinct. A small old lady had made a complaint that there were strange noises coming from the abandoned flat next door to hers. She wanted the police to check it out. So he gladly obliged and rode there. But after manipulating the door open, he was faced with a sight no grown adult would want to see. There were 3 little girls in front of him covering away from his presence. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10 years old, whilst the second must have been around 6 and the youngest 3 at most. The poor girls looked quite rough. By the looks of them, they hadn't had a proper meal in a good while. Their clothes were filthy and falling apart and their faces were dirty. These kids were clearly abandoned. This hurt Harrison greatly. They reminded him of his daughter he had lost in a car accident just 2 years prior. How someone could abandon them was beyond his belief. He just wanted to wrap them up in a hug and keep them safe. It took some time to garner their trust, but once he was able to do so, he whisked them back to the precinct in his warm car. Back at the precinct after some hot chocolate and a few chats, he came out that they were in fact the daughters of drug dealers who had decided they no longer wanted them. So when the girls were sleeping, they had just left, leaving them all alone to fend for themselves, which up until that point they had been struggling to do. They were homeless and unloved. Harrison tried to continue with his job as normal, but he couldn't shake the image of their little faces when he found them. They deserved better than life had dealt them, so he decided to do something that no one on his force could begin to understand. Something so drastic, it had people in absolute awe. Harrison decided to formally adopt the girls. Turns out their names were Natalie, Lisa, and Kate. Kate was the youngest and was absolutely thrilled to be adopted. She loved the idea of having a loving dad and a bed all to herself. While Natalie, the oldest, was highly skeptical. She couldn't understand why a grown man would want to take on 3 broken girls just like that. She didn't have the luxury of being innocent and trusting. Life had taught her very hard lessons a girl her age should never have known. But when she heard the story of how he had lost his beloved daughters in such a tragic crash, she began to understand a little better. The poor officer was still breathing the loss of his girls that he hadn't even had the courage to clear out their rooms. This of course worked out perfectly as it gave the girls their own rooms to live in. The 2 youngest shared the room and toys to play with and beds to sleep in. Naturally, Harrison was quite nervous about them coming to live with him. For almost 2 years he had been living all alone. His wife had left him after they lost their daughters, so he had been mourning all alone. Yet their apprehension at first, they soon settled into their new home. People that lived around Harrison were naturally inquisitive about his new familial additions. Not only because he had adopted 3 little girls, but also because they were black. The fact that a white police officer had adopted 3 little black girls was simply so hard for some people to digest. To them, they felt it was unnatural or strange, but to Harrison, all he saw were 3 little girls who needed protection and love. Something he knew he could do, so he took a chance. As time passed, so did the girls begin to warm up slowly to their new dad. Whenever he wasn't working, he made sure to get them out of the house and do something fun. Whether it was rollerblading, playing in the park, or going to the public library, the personalities of the girls each began to shine in their own way. Slowly, Natalie began to trust Harrison enough to share her love of painting with him. It was here when she was painting that Harrison got to see a lighter side to her personality. When she painted, she no longer looked weighed down by the fact that she had been abandoned, but rather was able to surrender to the moment of enjoyment. Once while painting, she mentioned her parents to Harrison, but when she realized what she was doing, she quickly stopped herself. She had brought up too much pain in telling Harrison. It was after that moment that Harrison realized that the girls were in dire need of therapy. He knew that he didn't have the relevant or appropriate skills needed to help them, so he enrolled them in a therapy program. But the therapist had to share with them after a month of therapy was simply startling. The girls had in many ways been treated like animals. They had been given scraps of whatever the parents hadn't eaten for dinner, and were sometimes not fed for a few days. They had only gone to school intermittently, when their parents would let them go, and were beaten severely if they argued at any point. The youngest had yet to really understand what she had gone through, but the 2 older girls were wise enough to know that it wasn't right. But the poor things had at one point loved their parents greatly, as young children do, so they had only looked for love and affection. Harrison was so grateful he had found them when he did. He made a promise to them and himself that he would do everything in his power to ensure that the sweet trio got only the best in life. As time passed, the little family were able to heal from their own traumas and begin to build new lives for themselves. The girls became more comfortable with their new dad and home. They began to thrive at school and even began to bring friends home with them. One step at a time, they were closer to building and living more normal lives. Harrison was thrilled at the idea that he was able to provide them with a loving home and a somewhat normal childhood. Every night before he went to sleep, he could pray that his girls would be able to assimilate into the world once they left school. He had great aspirations for them, hoping that they could achieve anything they set their heart to. In some way, all his prayers paid off in the end as his girls went on to be quite successful. Natalie went on to study to be a therapist. It was her intention to help children like her. Lisa became an avid journalist reporting on crime and specializing in forensics, whilst little Kate was working towards her PhD in music. 27 years later, Harrison could hardly contain the pride he had for his children. Little did he know what they had in store for him. It was Kate's graduation when she finally being awarded her doctorate in musical therapy and brain. Thanks to her compelling and unique thesis, she was asked to present the speech when accepting her award. Harrison sat anxiously and proud in the crowd, waiting to hear her speech. But then something strange happened. Kate stood up at the podium and then was joined by her two older sisters. She then began her speech and told the crowd the inspiring story of her beloved adoptive father. How he had gone against all odds to help save them from a life that would in many ways have been a misery. She explained to the crowd how everything she had done would have never been possible without him and his caring heart. Harrison could hardly contain his emotions. There, standing and talking in front of hundreds of people, was his little 3-year-old. His little girl, with her big sister shouting his praise. At that very moment, his hardships of single fatherhood all melted away. Every second of blood, sweat and tears had been so worth it. His girls were his everything and they knew it. After all, without him, their life would have had a very different trajectory. It just goes to show that a little love and a lot of compassion can really go a long way. Would you have adopted the girls if you had found them? What is your stance on adoption? And what do you think about this story? Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. And if you want to hear other incredible stories, visit the channel to check it out. I'm sure you will be moved or shocked by so many impressive stories available.